All right, welcome to Austin CAD User Group meeting for May 2023. This month we have Jeff Bartels coming to talk to us about what's new in Civil 3D 2024. Thank you for coming to talk with us, and go ahead and take it away.
Wonderful. Thank you. I am going to start by sharing my screen here. There we go. Let me go to slideshow. Perfect. All right. And I'm compelled to ask, can you see me okay?
I can see you. Yes.
All right. The hardest part is finished.
And you're not on mute.
Yes. That's right. Okay, so thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Jeff Bartels. I'm an infrastructure technical specialist at Autodesk. And today we are going to be looking at the new features available in Civil 3D 2024. Just a little bit about myself. I've been working in the civil infrastructure industry for a long time, and I have been training Autodesk applications for almost the same amount of time. I have been at Autodesk now for about 10 years. Since coming to Autodesk, I contribute to a blog called Civil Immersion. That's an initiative that myself and a couple other technical specialists put together for the purpose of creating how-to videos to help users make the most of their Autodesk investment. I've got the URL there listed on screen. If you haven't stopped by over the past few years, we have posted hundreds of recordings. So if you haven't stopped by all means, take a look when you get a chance. There's a lot of content there that you may find helpful. Okay, our agenda for today, we're going to be looking at the improvements made in Civil 3D 2024. Specifically, we'll be looking at the improvements made in the area of Project Explorer. We'll look at some of the updates to corridor transitions. If you're someone who brings geospatial data into Civil 3D, I think you'll be happy with the updates for ArcGIS Online, the connector for ArcGIS Online. And then finally, my favorite update is the one having to do with our custom subassemblies. We have a much easier way to manage our PKT files now. And I've got questions there at the end. I'm not sure how we typically handle questions. I'm happy to do them as we go, or we could do them at the end.
Either one will work. Okay.
Well, if you're inclined to just jump in, go right ahead. Otherwise, we can address questions at the end of the session. This is going to be a PowerPoint-free zone. We'll be working live in the application for the duration of our time together. All right, let me move this interface item down here. So we are going to start out by talking about the improvements made to Project Explorer. As you can see, I'm working in Civil 3D 2024. And first thing I should mention is Project Explorer is now included with your Civil 3D installation. There's no more separate install. It's no longer an entitlement. When you install Civil 3D 2024, you have Project Explorer. So everybody has it now. To access Project Explorer, we can get it here on the Home tab. Now, we've been able to do this before. Let me click to bring that up on screen. There we go. And Project Explorer is, if you've never used it before, it's a tool that consolidates several Civil 3D dialog boxes into a single place. It provides an opportunity to have a one-stop shop to edit your civil data in your file. All right, I'm going to minimize this for a second. So now we've got access to it. We can also open Project Explorer by selecting objects in our file. For instance, if I select this assembly, for instance, and right-click, here in the right-click menu, there's a new option, Open in Project Explorer. This will take us right to that civil object. Any of the objects that are listed here are fair game. If I select that, in the case of an assembly, for instance, it's a really nice graphical way to make changes to this without having to go in and out of several dialog boxes. If I wanted to rename this lane, for instance, I could just call that right lane right from here. And then if that lane is selected, I could come over and edit its properties from here. I'm going to change that to a 20-foot lane just so we can see an obvious change. If I drag that over, you can see how that updated in the model. Let me close this. So we can access Project Explorer by selecting our entities. We can also do it through the prospector. If I go to prospector and I'll open up my alignments group here, If I right click on the alignment, I can choose Open in Project Explorer. Once again, it takes me right to the appropriate tab, selects that alignment. I can see the associated profiles with that. Now, when we use Project Explorer over the past year or so, it has included a tab for property sets. In the event you have any property sets in your drawing that conform to these particular objects, we can find them down here. In 2024, there is now a dedicated property set tab. So if I select this, right here, I can see a listing of all the property set definitions I have in this file. Now I just have one. If I had a whole bunch of them in here, there is a menu that we can use to filter these to show all of them: visible, hidden, referenced, unreferenced, violated, unviolated. So a great way that I can sort those if needed in the event I have a lot. I'm currently using a single property set definition, and I've applied that to the utilities that I'm showing in this file. I've got a gravity sewer here. I've got a pressure network. I've got solid geometry representing a gas main, and then I've got another one here representing fiber optic. I should mention this. On this tab, this dedicated tab, there is a button that we can use to create property sets. If I click this, it will bring up my property set definition dialog box. Now, I have to admit, when I go looking for this particular feature in the ribbon, I end up poking around for a while until I can find it. So for me, this is a much easier way to access that dialog box. So we can use that to create or edit property set definitions. If you select a definition from the list, you will see the objects down here in the lower right that have that definition assigned to them. And we can see all the items there that I kind of talked about on screen. There's a filter here as well. I could say I'd only like to see the structures, maybe. And then once we isolate this down, make the list a little bit shorter, I can right click on these and I can say zoom to or pan to. If I'm looking for a particular object, I can zoom to structure 1, for instance. I could right click on structure 2 and pan to if I want to keep the same zoom level. When you select a structure here, we can now edit the property set information over here to the right. So on structure 2, I'd like to change that. I'll just double click. We'll change the SU value from A to D. So typical Project Explorer functionality, if you see something that's purple, you can edit that value. I'm going to zoom back to structure 1. And I want to show you that we can use this new tab. There's options here to add or remove property set data from objects. If I select an object, for instance, and I've got a property set chosen here, I can see that object has the property set assigned. If I click this button, I can remove that property set from that object. Likewise, let me press escape. If I select an object and I have a property set chosen, I can use this button to add that property set definition to that object, so long as that property set definition supports that object type. So I've just added that back. And then I can see that when it put that in there, it's using the default values. The owner, I forget what the owner is. I'm kind of lazy. I'm going to go and Control C. I'll copy the owner off this other one, and I will double click and we'll Control V and paste it onto that new one. Okay, so that is the improvements made to the Project Explorer functionality in 2024. Next, we'll talk about some updates to corridor transitions. Corridor transitions came out in the last release of Civil 3D, 2023.2, so it's a relatively new feature. And with corridor transitions, you can change the shape of your corridor without the need for targeting. Now, it's not meant to replace targeting. It's an alternative. It comes in handy if you're using subassembly parts that maybe don't support targets. Using a transition, we can apply transitions to any of the dimensions associated with a subassembly part. And on my screen, I've got a corridor that represents a portion of a roadway design, and I have created a transition already. I've applied a transition to the lane width here to create this widening. Since the transition feature is relatively new, I'm going to create one more transition, then we can look at some of the updates. I would like to create a transition to define a driveway in this area. If I zoom in on my assembly, I have got a custom subassembly part. And if I select that, go to my properties palette, notice that it has a dimension that controls the height of the back of curb. Currently, that's 1/2 foot. If I was to set that to 0, for instance, this would be in the driveway area. When I set that to 0, you can see how the curb drops. And once we get past the driveway, I can bump that back up to 1/2 foot to raise that up again. So that's what I'm going to do. To create that transition, I will select my corridor, and from the contextual ribbon, I'll use this recent tool, Edit Corridor Transition. This brings up the corridor transition dialog box, and here you can see my widening. To create a new transition, I'm going to click this button, and this allows me to create what's called a transition set. The reason we have sets is because quite often you may want to do multiple transitions consecutive, and by having a set, they can all be tied together as a single group. When I launch that command, the first thing Civil 3D asks me is, which subassembly do you want to transition? And as I hover over my corridor, we can see the names of my subassembly parts. I would like to apply the transition to this left curb driveway part. And then it says, which parameter do you want to adjust? I'm going to grab that back of curb that we just saw. Now it says, what station value would you like to start your transition? I'm going to start at station 50. I'll just type that in and press enter. And it says, what's the parameter going to be at that station? And I can see right here that currently it's 0.5. I'd like to keep it at 0.5. So I'm going to type that in, 0.5. And now it says, all right, what station do you want to transition to? I'd like to, over the course of 3 feet, I'd like to drop this to 0. So my next station is going to be 53, enter. And then my parameter value is going to be 0 because we're taking away the height of the curb, enter. And then finally, it's asking me for the transition type. It's saying, since you're going from one dimension to another, how do you want to get there? Do you want to apply a smooth curve or parametric curve or something? I'm just going to take the default linear, so it'll be a straight line transition. Now, I can keep going. Here, I'm going to go across the driveway. I want a 15-foot driveway, so my station would be 68, enter. And my parameter for that will be 0 because I'm still in the driveway, and enter for a linear transition. And then finally, I would like to, over the course of the next 3 feet, I'd like to come up 1/2 foot. So we will make this 68 plus 3, 71, enter. And my parameter is going to be 0.5 because we're going back up to a full elevation. And then I'll hit enter for linear and enter again when I'm finished. And I can name these. I'll just call this driveway 1 in the event I have multiple driveways. So when we do a transition set like this, especially if it's vertical, it can be difficult to see from this view. So if you'll indulge me for just a second, I am going to load a pre-saved viewport. And one thing I've not done yet, I need to click the apply button. When I click apply, we'll see that transition take place. That's where it drops down, goes across the driveway, and comes back up. So that's basically how we create a transition. Now, in 2024, we have some tools for managing these, make it a little bit easier. We can, first of all, we can pan and zoom to transitions. If I right-click on my widening, for instance, I can say zoom to, and I can go right to that. So if you're someone who has multiple transitions on a corridor, especially if it's a long one, it's very easy to navigate between them. I am going to pan to driveway 1, since we can do that as well. Excuse me. Another thing we can do is adjust the processing order of these. We've got a pair of arrows. If I select a transition, I can use the up arrow to push this up, or I can use this one to push it down. The processing order comes into play if you have a transition within another transition. For instance, if you had a transition that creates a widening, and in the widening area, you would also like to have a transition for a driveway, you may want to process the widening first and then have it process the driveway. The rule of thumb here is the items that are further down in the list have a higher priority because they are processed last. And then finally, what if I would like to shift this driveway or any transition set along my baseline? Historically, if I wanted to adjust this driveway, if I wanted to move it, say, 20 feet to the right, I would have to go through and manually edit each of these stations. In 2024, if you hover over the transition set, you'll find a new padlock icon. If I click and lock that, it locks all of these stations together. So if I wanted to move this driveway 20 feet to the right, for instance, I could click the start station and change it from 50 to 70. And when I press enter, if you watch the other stations there, you'll see those update. And I don't have to use the first one. I can click any of these stations and add 20 to it, and all of them will move together. When I'm finished, I can come down and click apply, and we can see how that driveway shifts down. So much easier now if we need to move these things around as the design changes. One more thing, won't do it here, but I just want to mention we can export our transitions as a common limited file. And we were able to do that in 2023.2 as well. But if I export this as a common limited file, it will also retain the lock properties. When I export those, I could edit values if I wanted to. I could add more transitions, and I can import transitions into another drawing if I wanted to. So that's also possible. Okay, so that represents the updates to the corridor transition functionality. Next, we'll talk about the updates having to do with the connector for ArcGIS. If you've used that tool before, a wonderful tool. I mean, back in the old days, if we wanted to bring geospatial data into Civil 3D, we had to do it as kind of a shape file going way back. We'd use map import and do that. That was nice. You could bring the data in and make Civil 3D or make AutoCAD objects out of it. Then the FDO came out, and we could connect right to geospatial databases. However, the content that we brought in had map styles and map labels. Then we got the connector for ArcGIS. Now we kind of have the best of both worlds. We can connect right to an ArcGIS Online or ArcGIS portal data source, and we could bring that information into Civil 3D. However, when we brought that data in, we had to make Civil 3D objects out of it. We all know that geospatial data is the layers are either going to be a point, linear or lines, or a closed shape. So if I was bringing in lines, for instance, when I brought those into Civil 3D, I would have to make them an alignment or a feature line. And you may not always want to do that. Now in 2024, we have much more control over the data that we bring in from ArcGIS Online. And we'll take a look at that. I'm going to start by logging into ArcGIS Online, because I want to show you the geospatial data that we're going to be working with. When I log in, I'll choose content. This is where I've stored my information. And then I'm going to come down and grab the Fayetteville, Arkansas folder that I've created. And I've uploaded several geospatial files in here, and I've created a web map. A web map is nothing more than a container. It allows you to view multiple geospatial layers in a single place. Right here, you can see the layers that I've created. They were all made from shape files, and then I just made the web map to bring them all together. So I'm going to click to select that web map, and then I'll choose Open in Map Viewer. And in the viewer, we can see the geospatial data. All the layer names are over here, and I can control their visibility by clicking these eye icons. So if I turn on floodway, you can see the geometry for that. I've got one here for lot lines. I've got one for ponds. Okay, so that's the data that I'm interested in. I would like to connect to this data from Civil 3D. Let's jump over to Civil 3D. And I'm in a relatively brand new drawing. This drawing doesn't have any coordinate system assigned to it yet. Let me go to the Settings tab, and I'm going to right-click on the drawing name, and I'll choose Edit Drawing Settings. And this is in Fayetteville, Arkansas. I happen to know the coordinate system I want to use. I know the code for that, AR83-NF. This is Arkansas 983 North Zone US Foot. I'll click OK. And once I assign that coordinate system, now I can connect to that geospatial data. I'll do that by going to Insert, and then I'll click Autodesk Connector for ArcGIS. And when I do, Civil 3D allows me to log right into ArcGIS Online. And from here, I can choose my area of interest. Now, I could type in Fayetteville, although that's quite a large target. I happen to have an address here that's in the area that I'm interested in, and I've got a horrible memory. So I've just put that in Notepad there so I can paste this. And I'm looking for that address in Fayetteville, Arkansas. There it is. Let's back up just a little bit. And my area of interest is going to be, I'll click this rectangle and I can define that on screen. We'll just drag it out about that far. Once you define your area of interest in this environment, then ArcGIS Online will show you the data that you have that conforms to that area. And you can see that there's, by default, there's, public data I could bring in here. If I go to my content here, I can find that web map that we just looked at a second ago. Let me choose that. And here's the layers. If I'd like to view the data that's on a layer, I can click the eye again. I'm going to look at lot lines first. Let me click the eye, and then I'll back up a touch so we can see that. If I want to bring this data into my Civil 3D environment, I will click this toggle, and then I can choose the feature type that I'm going to create. Notice that now in 2024, we have the option of creating AutoCAD geometry. So based on the data that you're bringing in, you could either create AutoCAD points, polylines, or polygons. I'm going to bring these lot lines in as polylines, and I will also bring in the easement geometry as well. We could kind of turn that on so you can see what that looks like. Let's choose that, and I will bring that information in as polylines. And then I'm going to bring in the floodway as well, and we will bring in the floodway as feature lines. So, but I don't have to select them all, just grab the ones I want, and then I can come down and choose Add to my design project. When I do that, Civil 3D will bring up a dialog box that allows me to create a template. What I'm doing with this dialog box is I'm saying the data that's coming from ArcGIS, I want to apply settings to that to control the stylization. And the fact that I'm making a template means that I can reuse those settings again in the future. That's the goal here. At the top of the dialog box, there's a gear. If I click that, it can take me to the active folder. This is where the templates are stored. By default, the templates are stored under your login, under app data, Civil 3D 2024, under this folder called ArcGIS Import Settings. You could put the active folder on your server if you wanted to save these settings and share them with others. But that's where we control that. And then if you'd like to create a new template, I can click right here. Before I do that, notice there's the name of the web layer, or the web map that I had, and then these are the 3 layers that I'm bringing in. Let me choose Add New to create a new template. I'll call this template Fayetteville demonstration. And you can see the folder where it's going to go. At the top of the dialog box, I can see all of the different feature types that I can create from the GIS layers that I'm bringing in. And if you remember, 2 of those layers I was going to bring in as AutoCAD objects. So I'm going to choose that tab first. If I was to do nothing at this point and just come down and click OK, it would simply bring in that data using whatever the default setting is down here. And that goes for any of these objects. Okay, if I said I wanted to bring stuff in as feature lines, it's going to get the default settings. I don't want the default settings. I would like to have some control over how this stuff is stylized. So starting on the AutoCAD Objects tab, I'm going to click to create a setting, and then I will give that setting a name. I'll call this lot geometry. Now, what GIS layer is this setting going to apply to? I wish I could click here and see the names of the layers that I selected in ArcGIS Online. Unfortunately, I can't. A workaround for right now, if I click in this query area, we'll talk about query in a little bit. If I click in the query area here, I can see the names of the 2 layers that I chose to be AutoCAD objects. So I can simply select this and I can copy that to my clipboard, and I can Control V and paste it here. Once again, we'll talk about query and priority in a second. Since I'm bringing in this geospatial layer as polylines, I can then choose a layer in my drawing. So I'm going to come down to a layer called EX lots. There we go. And I'm going to do one more. We'll click add, double click. We're going to say this is my easements. One shortcut that I do have, if I don't know the name here, I can use asterisks as a wildcard. I know that that layer starts with the word ease, so I can put an asterisk on there. One thing to note, if you are using wildcards, the text that you type is case sensitive. So for the easements GIS layer, I am going to put that geometry on a layer called EX easement. And then one more thing, let's go to feature lines, because one of my layers is going to come in as feature lines. I'll click add. We'll double click for the setting. And this was my floodway. Source layer, can't remember that right now. I'm just going to steal that from the query. And I'll paste. Since I'm bringing this geometry in as feature lines, I can pick a feature line style from here. I'll choose this one called floodway. I can also assign an object layer. I can pick a site if I want to, or if I wanted to, under feature type, I could change my mind entirely and say, just bring this geometry in as a 2D or 3D polyline. I'm going to go with feature line for right now. And when I'm finished, I will come down and click OK. And this will save.
Wait,
This will save my template as a JSON file.
Jeff, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
I wanted to know if you can query by multiple types for the floodway. So in GIS, I do a multiple value query on flood zone and flood zone sub-entity from the
Yep.
FEMA data.
Yes, we can. You've read my mind. We're going to look at that next.
Wonderful.
Yes. All right. So I'm saving the template here. Let me click save. And then I'll click import. And now as that data comes in from ArcGIS Online, it is comparing it against my settings, and it will apply the stylization that I've assigned. If I zoom in on this now, if I hover right here, I can see that's a lot line. It's on layer EX lots. And if I select that geometry and come over to my properties palette under extended data, you can see that the attribution associated with that has now been attached to this data as a property set. That's the property lines. Let me come down and grab the easement. Well, if I hover over that, we can see the layer for that. Same thing. If we go to the properties palette, we can see the attribution. And I'm kind of obsessive compulsive, so I'm going to select this first one. I'll choose select similar. And under the properties, I will go to the design tab and I'll enable my line type generation so that my dashes look good in the curves. And then finally, we can see the floodway here came in as feature lines using the appropriate style. And just like the other ones, it also has its attribution. Now, this is fantastic. I mean, this is better than what we had in the prior versions, but we can actually take things even further. In this case, I stylized these objects. I applied the style to the layer. We can also stylize data based on its attribution. And just to show you this, I'm going to jump back to ArcGIS Online, and I've got a layer here called fence. If I turn that on and I select one of these, you can see it's a single layer, but I've got geometry on here with attribution type, and I can see this particular shape is a chain link fence. If I click this one is split rail. And if I click this one, it is barbed wire. I would like to bring these entities in, and I would like to apply styles to them based on their attribution. Let me go back to Civil 3D. And I'm going to go back to the connector for ArcGIS. It remembers where I was. So I'm going to go to Content. I'll grab my web map, and then I will come down to Fence. We can turn it on just so we can see it there on screen. And then my type, I could bring this in as polylines or feature lines. I'm going to bring it in as feature lines just because I happen to have styles defined for those fence types as feature lines, but you could do it however you like. I'll just grab that one layer and I'll click add to my design project. And then I don't have to create a new template if I don't want to. I can edit an existing one. If I open this menu, We can see the templates that I've created before. These are the ones, they're JSON files that are stored in that folder. If you want to delete those, you can go in and delete them. I'm going to take an add to one that I've made already. In the event you have a lot of geospatial layers that have common names, you might use this approach to further refine your template as you go. I'm going to select this template and choose Edit. And then I will go to the Feature Line tab, and you can see what we left with before. I'm going to create some new settings now. I'll click Add, and I'm going to call this FNC, and we'll call it Chain Link. Source layer, I'm 99% certain it's called Fence. Yes, there it is there. Let me paste. So in this case, I don't want to apply the style to the entire layer. This is where I'm going to use the query option. If I choose query, I'll make sure that my GIS layer is selected here as the property source. Okay, what properties, what layer am I looking at to find properties? I will then click to add a property. I am looking for objects on the layer that have a property type equal to, and in this case, it's chain link. Let me click OK. And then I can choose a style for that. I could also pick the layer, the object layer, site, and the type. I'm going to just stick with the defaults here. Let me do the next two. We'll do FNC dash split rail. And I'll hit the tab key. We're using the fence layer, and then my type equals split rail. And I'll click OK. One more. FNC. This one's going to be barbed wire.
Jeff, in that query, is it SQL or Autodesk proprietary?
That I don't know. I'm not sure. I can, and one thing I was going to show here, I know many of you are probably thinking the same thing. I know I was. If I go to type here, type equals, and there's different things here. I think if it's numeric, you can do equals, greater than, less than, not equal to. But value, I would really like to be able to click in there and see all of the possible values and just select one. That's not possible at this time. Wildcards in this column are not possible at this time. The option, I guess the only workaround or automated option we have would be if I come out to here, I can steal values from the objects here.
You have to know what the values are in order to query them.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. That's how it is right now. Yep. So I just copied that to my clipboard and I will paste. And then one more thing, I'm not limited to a single property query. If I click add, this is where the operator comes in. I could say I want type barbed wire. I could do and another property. I could do or not, and I could continue to stack those up. Now that I've done this, the toggle on the left is used to select such that you can delete items. I'm just going to keep this one here. Let me click OK. And one thing I neglected to do was assign styles. Let me take care of the style for split rail. And I'll do the style for barbed wire. There we go. Notice there is a priority setting here. In the event you are bringing in objects and those objects possibly conform to multiple settings. In this case, I don't have that issue, but in the event you have data that conforms to multiple settings, you can use this priority number to control who wins. Okay, they're all set to 1 right now, but higher the number, or the lower the number, the higher the priority. So not a factor here, but that's what the priority is set for. And
Jeff,
then, yes.
could you expand on that a little bit? If we've got feature lines and they overlap, for example, the floodway, are we looking at like which feature line will end up taking the precedence in the site? Or are we looking at which layer will draw on top of one another.
This priority has to do with stylization only. For instance, let's just imagine, it's going to be theater of the mind here for a second. Imagine I had some points that represented trees, and some of those trees had an attribute of like current status, dead versus live, we'll say. And let's say that there was another attribute that referenced their trunk diameter. I could create a setting that says that trees that have the attribute dead are going to use this symbol and this label. I could create another setting that says all trees that have a greater, and all trees that have a trunk diameter greater than 6 inches are going to have, we'll say, like a live tree symbol and a label. So then you may look at it and say, well, what if I have dead trees that have a 6-inch diameter? Well, I would set the dead tree one to have a higher priority of 1. Okay, and then that would dictate. So it has to do with the stylization only, which style is going to win. Was that understood? Okay.
Yeah.
Sometimes theater of the mind is a little more challenging. I wish I had a data set to show that, but I'm afraid I
followed
don't.
it pretty well.
Okay. All right. So let me click OK. And another thing I just want you to notice, you could have a template that's got 100 settings in it and use it to bring in a single layer if you want to, that you don't have to match the number of settings to the number of layers. So let me import those. And if I zoom in, you can see I had a single geospatial layer that I brought in, and the objects were stylized based on their attribution. Okay. So tremendous improvements from what we had in prior versions. And so we can now stylize our stuff. We could create AutoCAD entities if we want to, and we can get very granular with respect to attribution. Okay.
Jeff, can you real quick
Sure.
kind of just back up a bit and what is needed? So you have to have an ArcGIS license and be able to put the data in ArcGIS Online, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so you have to have any user that wants to connect to this data has to have an ArcGIS license.
That's correct.
Okay, all right. I just
Yep.
wanted to make sure I was clear on that.
Yep. And when I click this button, it since I've logged in already, when I click this button, it just takes me right in. If I hadn't been to ArcGIS Online first, it would come up and it would ask me for my login credentials.
Or your login credentials.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Okay. And that's an ArcGIS like pro license, correct? Or an online license, whatever.
I think, yeah, definitely the online license. I'm not sure what about how the licensing works on their end, but
Gotcha.
But yeah, so you'd need one of those licenses to get in. And it's kind of nice. There's things that we can pull in, and one other thing I should mention. When you take and connect to content like this, there's a tool here called Data Source Manager. This will show you the geospatial layers that you've connected to. And I can, there's a couple settings here. Refresh. Theoretically, if the data in ArcGIS Online was updated, you could come down here and refresh a layer and get the updated content. And there was also a save back. We had the ability to like add. I could create new easements, for instance, in here, and I could save those back to the source. In order to save back, you have to have rights in ArcGIS to be able to do that. So the ArcGIS folks would be able to handle or control that, being able to save back. But I wanted to mention that with the new functionality that we have here now, right now, refresh and save back with like the AutoCAD objects and stuff isn't yet supported. So just wanted to make sure that everybody was aware of that. That's something it's a known issue, and it's something that they're working on, but save back with the AutoCAD stuff's not yet there. Okay. Let's go to Subassembly Composer. If you've ever created custom PKT files, you know that can be challenging. to share those. You know, once you make a drawing with a custom PKT and then you want to send that file to somebody else, there's challenges to get that stuff to operate correctly in somebody else's environment. Likewise, if the file, the PKT file that you're using, if it gets updated or edited, there can be some challenges getting your own drawing to update using that new PKT. Things are so much better now in 2024 because our PKT files are treated like external references. It works, it's virtually identical. On my screen, I've got a drawing that represents a roadway reconstruction area, and I've got an alignment that goes under the road that is going to represent a box culvert. And I'm going to model that box culvert as a corridor, and I'm going to be using a custom subassembly part. I'm going to come down here to Subassembly Composer for a second. And from here, I'll go to Open. And inside my PKT Files folder, I'm going to grab this custom part that I created. When I choose Open, we can see that on screen. So that's the part I'm interested in. Let me minimize this. And here in Civil 3D, I'm going to create an assembly. Let's go to the assembly, create assembly, and I'm going to call it box culvert. I'll keep the other settings here. And I will click to place this near where my corridor is going to be built. And then I will select the assembly. And from here, I'll choose Tool Palette. And my tool palette has a custom tab called Custom Parts. All right, I made that myself. I just right-clicked on one of these other tabs and I said New Palette, and I just named it. When we have a palette like this, I can add my subassemblies to it. All right, so this isn't new yet. I can right-click on this tab and say Import Subassemblies. This is new. In 2024, there is a new toggle that is selected by default that says Link directly to PKT file. Historically, when we added subassemblies to a palette like this, it was copying stuff into our program data folder. And that's what kind of complicated things in the event the PKT file changed or trying to, share it with other people. Now it's going to treat this just like an XREF. So I'm going to leave that checked. And I'm going to go to source file. Let me click the folder. And I'm going to go into my exercise files here. Under PKT files, I'll grab that box culvert that we just looked at a second ago. And I'll choose open. I'm going to drop that onto my custom parts palette. Let's click OK. There it is. I can then right click on this and I will choose refresh image to kind of clean that up a little bit. So this particular item that we see is pointing directly at that PKT file. Now I would like to add this to my model. I'll select it and then I'll click my insertion here to add that. As soon as I did that, the path was saved with this drawing. This particular object knows where the main file lives. That's all saved with the drawing now. In fact, when you add these custom subassembly parts in 2024, over on the Prospector tab, there is a Subassemblies group that I can expand and I can see my custom parts over here. If I select a custom part down here in the preview area, I can see the name of it. I can see the source path, where it's coming from. And if I drag down far enough, I can see the version number if I've been using that within Subassembly Composer, and I can also see the current status is set to OK. Let's build a corridor from this. I'm going to go up to corridor, and I'll create a corridor, and we'll call it proposed culverts. I'm going to use my culvert alignments, my culvert profile. I'm going to use the culvert assembly, and then for my frequency, we will insert this every 5 feet. And I'll click OK. And I'll rebuild. And by default, my corridors are created using, or they originally display the longitudinal geometry. So I'm going to select this and I will change the style here to a working style so I can see all those assembly insertions. All right, so I've got the custom PKT file in here and I've used it to build a corridor. Now, what happens if the PKT file changes? If I go to Subassembly Composer, I'm going to make a kind of a significant change here. I'm going to grab this link and I'm going to hard code a dimension on this. We'll make it -12, just so it's significantly different. I'll grab link 1 and I will make this a +12. There we go. Let me mention, I've you can control your dimensions with input and output parameters, and that in many cases, that's what I do. I'm physically hard coding a number on here to simulate a change, like maybe I added a link or maybe I changed a code or something like this. At this point, this part is physically different than it was before. I'm going to save this now. Choose File, Save. And let's go back over to Civil 3D. There we go. In Civil 3D, if I wait long enough, eventually this will show me that my PKT file is out of date. If I want to speed things along a little bit, I can right click on Subassemblies and choose Refresh. And when I choose Refresh, you can see the icons change here. If I select this part, I can see it's out of date. This drawing knows that the file that this guy's attached to is now different. To update this, all I have to do is right click and choose Update All Subassemblies. And I'll click OK, and you can see that changed. And then my corridor needs to be rebuilt. I'll right click on this and choose Rebuild. Okay, and everything updated. I didn't have to do anything fancy with the tool palette. I didn't have to close out of Civil 3D and reopen it. Okay, works just like an XREF. Knowing this, you can store your PKT files on a centrally located folder on your server if you wanted to. And anybody that has access to that folder can leverage those PKT files and use them. And if they update, they'll update for everybody. You can also put these PKT files within Autodesk Docs. You could store them there. If you do that, the intent is that the drawings that reference those would also be in Docs. If the drawings that reference them, the PKT files are in Docs, then the path gets reconciled correctly, no matter which stakeholder attempts to use them or when it comes to updating, things like that. So you could put it in the cloud or you can put it in on your local machine. One more thing, what happens if the PKT file gets moved? I'm going to bring up my Windows Explorer here for a second, and I'm going to go into my PKT files folder, and I'm going to cut this, and then we'll go and, what happens if this ends up in the wrong folder? I will paste to put it there. So if I go back to PKT, you can see it doesn't live there anymore. Let's close this. Once again, if I wait long enough, eventually this will update and let me know. But if I want to speed things up, I can right click and choose Refresh. And when I do, you can see the icon's different now. In fact, if I hover, it tells me it can't be found. If I select it, it'll tell me it can't be found. To fix this, I can right click and choose Fix Missing Paths. I can then select my item, and I can point to the folder where that file lives and select it. And when I click Open and Apply, you can see it updates and I'm right back in business. So much easier managing these now than it was just months ago, in prior versions of Civil 3D. Okay, those are the updates having to do with Subassembly Composer. Let me jump back here. So in today's session, we talked about several improvements in 2024. We talked about Project Explorer. We talked about how you could access Project Explorer by selecting objects in the drawing or the tool space. Project Explorer also includes a dedicated property set definition tab that makes it easier to view and manage your property sets for an entire drawing. We have updates to the corridor transitions. You can change their priority, moving them up and down in the list. We can zoom to them now if we want to. In the event we have lots of corridor transitions in a single model, and we can shift them along a baseline just by using that lock feature. We looked at the ArcGIS Online functionality. Now we can bring data in from ArcGIS Online and we can create AutoCAD entities. We can also we have much more control over the stylization. We can apply the styles to the layers or to the objects based on their attribution. And then finally, subassembly management. We looked at how PKT files are now retained. The path to them is retained and saved at the drawing level. So if a PKT file is changed, we can update it very easily, just like an external reference, whether you edit the file or whether the file ends up in a place where it shouldn't. You can still correct things very easily. All right. With that, we can address any questions that you guys may have.
Yeah, as far as Project Explorer goes, is it? I love Project Explorer. I love all the features. There's a ton you can do in there.
Mhm.
It gets really slow with bigger drawings. Has that been addressed at all? Is it sped up at all within 2024?
Oh, now, so you're saying that when Project Explorer is open, so I imagine you probably have it on a different monitor, something like that, and the more data that's in your file, the slower your Civil 3D runs. Is that correct?
Yeah. So whether it's, yeah, it doesn't matter if it's on the same screen or another screen, but when I'm in, say, design files, you know, large pipe networks, for example,
Sure.
and I'm in that design file, I like to go in there. Because there's a lot of tools in there to work with the network.
Yep.
But I've noticed, like, on larger files, it's really slow to update. It has to refresh that screen each time when you make a change.
Okay.
Are there any? Is that just something I'm doing wrong, or is that just part of functionality of the?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say it's anything you're doing wrong. I mean, it sounds like you're using the tool correctly. I have not leveraged it on like a really, really large file to know. I know that when I started using Project Explorer, one of the things that I had learned when I was investigating it was created as a modeless dialog box so that theoretically it wasn't supposed to tie up Civil 3D resources. Have you you've noticed that prior to 2024? Is that correct?
Yeah, it's not the resources so much in Civil 3D. It's like if I've got a sewer network,
Yeah.
and let's say there's 200 manholes. If I grab a group of manholes and change the name,
Mhm.
it does it fairly quickly, but then it's got to reiterate through everything, and it
Mm.
sits there and it goes for a minute. And if you try to do, it is connected to Civil 3D. So like if I want to zoom to a particular manhole, that gets quite slow. And the other one was, we were just talking about it.
Feature lines.
Feature lines, yes. If you're working with feature lines in there and you have a lot of feature lines in the particular design file, it's awesome to work on those feature lines within there because you can see about them and you can see the data, but it gets really slow.
Okay. I'm making a note here. I will investigate that, and I can get back to Tom or Adam on that,
Okay.
find out if
Yeah.
there's anything known regarding that.
Yeah, and I mean, we're talking large machine, data local,
Mhm.
lots of memory, big video card. There's nothing as far as, you know, this is actually the application. I know others have seen it also, so.
Sure. Yep, I can. I'll investigate that internally. I've not seen it myself, but I'm not working on the scale of drawings that you're working on. So, you know what? If you could, I mean, if you could zip a file that has like a big file that you're having issues with, if you could zip it and send it to me, I'd be more than happy to open it and check on my end and see if I'm seeing anything different than you are. If it's a nice thing, if I am, then I can send that to the development team, and if that would be okay with you, and they could use that as a test, you know, or this is a reproducible issue, and get their comments. And then if it if it does work for me just fine, then we know that it may be something environmental on your end.
Yeah. Understood. Yep.
So my email's easy to, you know, first name dot last name at Autodesk.
Yeah, I have it.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, Jeff, one question. What does the PKT stand for?
Oh, yeah, I'd be guessing. It's a, I remember a AU session that Peter Funk did many years ago. And the PKT is actually, I think it's a zip file. It's storing the stuff as it's like a zipped or it's a compressed version of whatever the content is. But I don't know. If I had to guess, I'd say something about package or something like that. I don't know. That'd be a good trivia question. I'll find out on that too. What does the file extension stand for?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Go ahead. No, yeah, I mean, like, if you ask the question, I can give you another question, but yeah. It's all done.
Go right ahead.
Okay, yeah, Jeff, like we start to use the property sets, for labeling purposes. When it comes to balance document, we try to integrate them for labeling purposes rather than having label styles, like 300, label styles for each type of, coding and stuff. Let's say you can use a property sets, within the label style. Now the issue that we have noticed, or maybe I don't know what's on the schedule first, and I can also talk to Steve Hill about it, because he's working on the property set stuff. It's if I have to import the property sets from one cat file to another one to make the label style work, it doesn't work. I mean, it's like, it looks like the way back in the original source file is not maintained when they're imported to the other one. So because of that one, they're broken all over the place. So if you don't have them at the beginning the right way in the template, let's say if I have a new cat file and I want to import in the property sets to use them in the label styles are going to find them as properly set and stuff. But because the order back rate and importing that cat file is different than the order they were created, the property says using the label will be broken. So rather than finding the property says like the COA polyline, whatever, like polyline property says we utility description. Let's say because we use this utility description, it's like existing 6-inch, I guess, whatever, water, yeah. So if that property says versus 6-inch water, it's called I call it utility description, and maybe it was created the 5th property set in the source file where it's imported in the new cat file, to be used for the label style. You have no idea which order it's in, it's imported. It might be the 6th, the 4th. So because it's not maintained, or I don't know how they find it by name or by the ID, because they do not maintain this, I pretty much it's broken. So pretty much I have to create from scratch the styles or the properties that's in the other file that I haven't tried to use them, and then I can link them, relink them to the label styles. So it's it's like. So it's like have the template right there from the beginning. Make sure it's not right on. If you're using the new cat file, do not bother because it will be too much work.
Yeah, I can understand what you're saying. And that's another one I can ask about. The property set data is something that is. I think they started using it, or they started looking at that heavily around 2017, something like that. Property set data is actually a function of AutoCAD architecture, and AutoCAD architecture is actually foundational. The code for AutoCAD architecture is actually foundational on the Civil 3D side. So we were looking at many years ago, we were looking to the development team to try and find a way to add data to objects so that it could be, so that we could have the additional attribution and have labels and stuff. And we were kind of pushing object data because that's how MAP does it.
Yes.
But
and the issue was like, if I can use expressions in Civil 3D and I can tie, a field in the label style to an expression name, like this is name, like, existing, blah, blah, blah. There's the expression name, as long as you find that name specific, tied with one, then the property set should be the same way. Pretty much, if I can tie it to a name, if I import that name in the cat file, it's a duplicate, override it. But if it's not, use that name, do not use, I don't know, some idea. I don't know how the property works at the code level. So, but that's all we noticed. Like, when you put it on the cat file, the stuff is broken because.
Yeah. I'm with you. I would say there are still some holes when it comes to the property set data because it's still fairly new. I would have you you're familiar with Tim Yaris and the folks on the development team. Have you brought that up on their end at all?
No, not yet. I was talking with Steve, because I know Steve works with all of this, like, Steve with RTC. Sure. He works with all of this from the property sets, like the development and stuff. So I know he's involved in that one from the private side. But he's like, that's good feedback. It's like, and he had no idea like that, or maybe he knew, but that's an issue. It's a known issue.
Yeah.
But maybe it will be somewhere to be like maybe streamlined in the future. But yeah, at this moment it looks like you better have your stuff together before you do your template. If you make any change to your template, you rename a property sets if you have and like that.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. The property set data can be a catch-22 because sometimes it has to exist in the drawing before the data gets there.
Yes.
And then the problem is if sometimes like, well, even with the stuff that we brought in, like from the ArcGIS Online, when you bring that data in, just in the testing that I've done, because I was looking at some of that myself, when I bring that data in from ArcGIS Online, it creates a property set. So I thought, okay, well, I'll take the property set definition. If I have a bunch of the same geospatial layers, they're going to have the same names. So I could create label styles with those. But what I found in its current state, just in 2024, when I bring in a geospatial layer, if the property set definition matches the one that it tries to create matches what's in the file, it'll create a new one and put a number after it.
Yeah.
So that's so, and I've mentioned that to the development team as well.
Yeah, it looks like it uses some whatever user ID or GUID, like one of those like the similar for pipe networks, one of those like auto generated stuff. And I guess when you copy them from one CAD file and paste them into the other one, before you import the label styles, it assigns a new ID to them and stuff breaks the whole cycle. Okay, yeah. I mean that's fine. At least it's on the radar. That's good.
Yes, and I would encourage you. I would encourage you to reach out to the folks on. Because that's something. If you're seeing it, other people are seeing it. I've seen it. But the more people that mention it, the higher hopefully that goes on their.
Yeah, Adam saw it. Adam saw it. Tom saw it.
Yeah. Okay. Anyone else have any other questions before we close up for the day? And I guess not. So, all right. Well, we appreciate you coming out to talk with us, Jeff. That was great information. I'm gonna go ahead and stop recording now.
All right. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.